So in this presentation, I want to build a simple state machine that will allow us to control this red light and turn it on and off based on some simple keyboard input. Um, and there's a couple different ways that we can handle this. We could change the light color, we can change its intensity. There's a number of things that we can do, but what I'll do is I'm going to select this point light. And this object, this is the thing that's going to receive the state machine. And now in some cases, it normally makes sense to add a state machine to the object that you want to control. But you can add state machines to other objects and talk to pretty much everything in the scene. So as we make more complex machines and want to track more complicated things, in some cases we'll build machines and attach to objects. In other cases we'll build these little managers in our screen in our scene that will keep track of other things. In this case, I just want to point out that I have the point light selected. I'll go down to the PlayMaker window and I'll add a state. Now the basic concept here is that in the first state, I want this to be kind of an idle state. And what I'll start to do is start calling idle. My state for idle will just basically be sitting waiting for some input. So whenever I call a state idle, it's kind of a wait state. Our machine is idling. Okay, now what I want to do in this state is I want to listen for some keyboard input. So I'm going to go to the input tab and I'm listening for a get key down, and I'll just double click. And the key that I'm listening for, maybe I'll listen for keypad 1. And when I press the keypad 1, I'll want to turn my light on. And when I listen for keypad 2, I'll turn my light off. Now I could build a toggle switch and use the same button to turn on and turn off, but I'll map different keys to it so we can see a couple different things happen. So get key down, keypad 1 will be my turn light on. Now, so I'm going to need a couple of events here, and I know that I want to, I know that I definitely want to turn light on, and I'll hit return, and it makes sense that also at some point want to turn light off, so I might as well create both events at the same time. Now I'll go back to my state tab. I have my idle state selected. When I press keyboard 1, I want to send it to an event of turn light on. Now remember, whenever we have an event and we have an action that's firing off an event, we have to add that as a transition on that state. So I'll add transition and I'll turn light on. While I'm here, I know that I'm ultimately going to want to turn light off as an option as well. So I'll add transition and turn light off. So now I have two different events that can happen during the idle state. And depending on what keyboard or key I press on the keyboard, it'll fire off to the different states that I determine. So currently, when I press get key down, keypad 1, I'm going to turn light on. I'm going to double click and add another get key down. And this time, I'll get keypad 2. And this time the event, I'll send it to the off. Now, whenever we create a state machine and we have a series of actions, it's important to note that these happen in order from the top down. So there's kind of a hierarchy to this. And I want to point out that I can select one of these and I can drag them around, and I can make one thing happen before another thing. Now, in this case, it doesn't really matter because it's either going to be the keypad 1 or keypad 2 or nothing at all. But it will be important based on our logic that as we make more complicated machines, we're going to want some things to happen first. At this point, I have a simple scenario where I have keypad 1 and 2, they control the light whether it's on or off, and so what I'll do is I'll right click and I'll add a state. This state is when the light is on, so I'll, it'll turn our light on. I'll just call this light is on, or set light to on, or you know, whatever we want to describe it here. I'll add another state, a straight click there. Let me get rid of that. We want to delete that state. I'm going to add another state. This state, I'll call it light is off, or set light off, or whatever makes sense. So now when we turn the light on, when that action is executed, obviously we want to send that over to light is on. If we turn the light off, we want to send it to the state where light is turned off. Okay, so the idea here, and we can test this really quickly when I hit the play button. Now remember, if I hit If I hit keypad 1, it should go to light on, so I'll tap keypad 1, and it did. It went over to light is on. I'll toggle the play button to reset this. I'll hit keypad 2, it fires off, light is off. So we have the basic logic set up, things are working pretty well. Now, this state, the light is on, all we want to do is we want to control basically the intensity of a light. When the light is on, we want it to be fairly intense. When it's off, we can control the intensity way down. Now, there's different ways to control turning the light on and turning the light off. If we look at the inspector panel, we look at our light, we can actually activate and deactivate the light. That's not what I'm going to control. I'm going to control the light intensity, okay? And the way that I'm going to do this is that I'm going to select the light is on state, and I'm going to look for an action that will help me control the light. And so what I'll do is I'm looking for lights, the lights tab, and I'll click on lights, and you'll see that I can set light intensity. I could also do, a number of other things here, but I'm going to keep it simple, and I'll double click and I'll set the light intensity. Now, when we end up in light is on, in this state, the game object that we want to talk to is the owner of this state machine, right? It's the point light. That's the owner of the state machine that we're working on. So that's right. The light intensity, we can leave that set to 1 because that's kind of what the default is. That's what it currently is right now. That looks pretty good. We don't need to set it to every frame. As long as that happens 1 frame, as long as that intensity is set to 1, we should be in good shape. I'm going to go to light is off, and I'll do the same thing. I'll double click the light intensity action, and this time I'll set the light intensity to something like 0.1, or I could even set it to 0. So the idea here is that the owner of this state machine, its intensity is set to 0 if we're in the off state. And I can test this really quickly. Now I got a little bit of a glitch in my logic in that the light is starting off in the on state, and that's okay. So if I go to on, I won't be able to see this happen, so I'll immediately go to off. So I hit number 2, and you can see that light is off. It turned off that light. Now, the major glitch that we have is that we want to get this state, when it's done doing whatever it's doing, we want it to return back to the idle state so that it can sit and listen to whether we want to turn it on or off again. I'll toggle the play button, and we'll fix that. You'll see that in the action that we chose, there is no call for an event. So in other words, it just does its thing. It doesn't really care. So we're not listening for more keyboard input. Whenever this thing is done, we want it to return back to the idle state. Now there's a system event for that. If I right click and go to add to transition, you'll see that there's this finished event. The finished event just basically says that, okay, whenever anything in this state is done, when it's done doing whatever it needs to do, then we have this finished event that we can drag back and loop it straight back to idle, or we could send it off to another state where it waits to do some more stuff. But at this point, when we turn our light off, when it's finished setting its intensity, it'll return back to idle. So let's test that out. So my light starts in the on position. When I hit the 2 button, it sets the light off and then returns it back to the idle state. Worked like a champ. So let's turn our light back on, and we want to do the same thing that we just did. So I'm going to select my light is on. I'm going to right click and add a transition, which is finished, and I'll draw that right back to the idle state. So now we have this little machine that works just like it's intended. We'll hit the play button. My light starts inside the scene with whatever parameter I've chosen inside the inspector panel, and now it's sitting and waiting for some user input. If I press the 1 button, it turns the light on, which is really just setting its intensity to 1, which is already the case. If I hit 2, it fires off this event. It fires off the turn light off event, which flows into the light is off state. In the light is off state, that's where we set the intensity to 0. When it's finished, it returns right back to its original state. Okay, so now I can toggle this light on and off. Well, if I focus my mouse here, 1 turns the light on, 2 turns the light off, and it's in this reset state. So that's the basic concept of these state machines. And you can see here that we have multiple events, and that's kind of the key to wrap your head around, that we could have all kinds of events waiting to happen in this idle state. And depending on user input, keyboard input, environmental input, tracking different variables, we can do different things. And we'll make games using these state machines and build some really complex kind of logic without ever having to do any straight scripting. So that's kind of the beautiful thing about PlayMaker. It's super powerful, and we'll catch up in the next presentation and start making our first game.